I'm Cassandra Mitchell, 29 years old, and my life changed forever when my grandparents' attorney said those unbelievable words, "You've inherited $38 million. I nearly fell out of my chair. My loving grandparents who raised me while my parents chased money and status had quietly amassed a fortune. As I sat there stunned, my phone buzzed. Mom and Dad, people I hadn't spoken to in 6 years, were suddenly calling. I knew exactly what they wanted. Before I continue with my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Hit that like button if you've ever dealt with difficult family members, and subscribe to join our storytelling community. Now let's dive into how my inheritance turned into a family war zone that I never saw coming. My childhood wasn't like most kids. While my friends had parents who attended their soccer games and school plays, mine were conspicuously absent. Richard and Diana Mitchell, my father and mother, were corporate lawyers who measured success solely by their bank accounts and social status. Our 5-bedroom house in an exclusive neighborhood was more like a showroom than a home. I spent more time with our housekeeper, Mrs. Patel, than with either of my parents. But I was fortunate in one crucial way. My grandparents, my father's parents, George and Margaret Mitchell, lived just 20 minutes away. Their modest 3-bedroom home became my real home. Every weekend and most summer days, I'd be at their house baking cookies with Grandma or learning woodworking from Grandpa in his garage workshop. They came to every school event my parents missed. When I had nightmares, I called them not my parents. "Family isn't about blood, Cassie," my grandfather would say. "It's about who shows up." My parents had a strange relationship with money. Despite their combined income being well into the high 6 figures, they were perpetually stressed about finances. The reason became clear. As I got older, they spent every dollar they made plus more. Luxury cars replaced perfectly good ones every year. Vacations were only worthwhile if they cost enough to brag about at dinner parties. Designer everything. Status everything. Even worse was how they treated my grandparents. Dad would call his parents only when he needed something, usually money. I remember overhearing a conversation when I was 15, my father asking for $50,000 for an investment opportunity that couldn't wait. Grandpa reluctantly agreed, but I later learned this wasn't a one-time occurrence. It was a pattern that had been repeating for decades. "We know we won't get it back," Grandma confided in me once. "But he's our son. We keep hoping he'll find his way." The final break with my parents happened when I was 23. I had just graduated college with a teaching degree, a career choice that horrified my status-conscious parents. I had student loans because they had refused to help with tuition, claiming I was wasting my potential on a low-paying job. At my small graduation party at my grandparents' house, my father started drinking heavily and launched into a tirade about my disappointing life choices. When Grandpa defended me, my father exploded. "You've always taken her side. Maybe if you hadn't spoiled her all these years, she wouldn't be settling for mediocrity." The argument escalated until my father said something unforgivable. "You two old fools have been undermining our parenting for years. No wonder she turned out to be such a disappointment." I watched my grandmother's face crumple. Something in me snapped. I stood up, told my parents exactly what I thought of their parenting, and asked them to leave. Then I told them not to contact me again until they were ready to apologize, not just to me but to my grandparents. 6 years passed. I never received that apology. I built my life as an elementary school teacher. I visited my grandparents every Sunday without fail. They never pressured me to reconcile with my parents, though I know it pained them to see the family fractured. When Grandma was diagnosed with cancer 3 years ago, Grandpa's health quickly declined too. They passed within 2 months of each other. The day after Grandpa's funeral, I received a call from their attorney, Thomas Reed. He asked me to come to his office regarding their will. I expected perhaps a small inheritance, maybe enough to pay off my remaining student loans. My grandparents lived comfortably but modestly. Their home was worth perhaps $400,000. I assumed they had some savings. When Thomas told me the full extent of my inheritance, $38 million in investments, real estate and cash, I thought he was joking. My grandparents had been extraordinarily successful with early investments in several technology companies. They had sold their business for millions decades ago but lived frugally, growing their wealth quietly. Why didn't they enjoy more of it? I asked through tears. Thomas handed me a sealed envelope. They asked me to give you this letter. I think it explains everything. Before I could open it, my phone rang. It was my father's number for the first time in 6 years. I didn't answer that first call, or the second, or the dozen that followed over the next 2 days. Finally, I received a text message from my mother, Cassandra. We're devastated about your grandparents. We need to talk as a family. Please call us back. Part of me wanted to maintain the wall I'd built, but guilt crept in. They had lost parents too. Maybe grief had changed them. After consulting with Thomas, who advised me to be cautious but open to reconciliation, I agreed to meet them for dinner at a neutral location, an upscale restaurant downtown. When I arrived, I barely recognized them. 6 years had aged them considerably. My father's once dark hair was now silver at the temples. My mother had that tight, stretched look that spoke of expensive cosmetic procedures. They stood when they saw me, their smiles seemingly genuine. Cassandra, my mother, breathed, moving to embrace me. The hug felt awkward, mechanical. You look wonderful, darling. My father extended his hand, which I reluctantly shook. Thank you for meeting us. It means a lot. The initial conversation was strained but civil. They asked about my teaching career with what appeared to be sincere interest. They shared memories of my grandparents, though I noticed these stories all centered around things my grandparents had done for them, never the reverse. Still, I began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, time and loss had softened their hardened hearts. Then came the pivot. We heard about the inheritance, my father said, casually swirling his third glass of expensive wine. Quite a surprise, wasn't it? My guard instantly went up. How did you hear about that? Oh, word gets around, my mother replied vaguely. Your grandfather's business associate Marcus mentioned something. We're just glad they were so well off. They deserved it. I knew this was a lie. My grandparents had been intensely private about their finances, and Marcus had passed away years before. They were fishing for information, and badly. It's funny, my father continued, his tone shifting subtly. I always assumed Dad would split things equally between us. Family first, he always said. Family is who shows up, I corrected quietly. Something flashed in my father's eyes. Well, regardless, I'm sure you're overwhelmed. Managing that kind of money is a full-time job. It requires experience, financial acumen. I have Thomas to help me, I replied. My mother reached across the table, patting my hand condescendingly. Darling, lawyers aren't financial advisors. Richard has decades of experience with high net worth investments. It would make sense for him to manage the portfolio. I withdrew my hand. I'm not looking to make any changes right now. The thing is, Cassandra, my father leaned forward, dropping all pretense. As the son, I should have received at least half of that inheritance. It's natural law. I'm sure they didn't intend to create this imbalance in the family. What your father means, my mother jumped in, seeing my expression harden, is that we're concerned about you. Sudden wealth can attract the wrong people. We just want to protect you. By taking my inheritance, I asked incredulously. Not taking, my father corrected. Sharing. Family helping family. We're thinking perhaps $5 million would be a reasonable portion. You'd still have more than enough. The mask had slipped completely now. 6 years of silence, no apologies, no genuine reconnection, just a cash grab. I stood up, throwing my napkin on the table. This meeting is over. My father's face transformed, the fake charm evaporating. Don't be stupid, Cassandra. You're a school teacher. What do you know about managing millions? You'll lose it all within years. I'd rather lose every penny than give you a dime after this performance, I shot back. My mother's voice turned cold. You always were a selfish child. This is why your grandparents spoiled you to turn you against us. They didn't turn me against you. You did that all by yourselves. I grabbed my purse. Don't contact me again. As I walked away, my father called after me loud enough for nearby diners to hear. You'll regret this, Cassandra. That money should be ours, and we're not going to let you steal it. I made it to my car before breaking down. The brief hope for reconciliation had been crushed, replaced by the sick realization that my parents hadn't changed at all. They had only seen an opportunity to get what they wanted: money, nothing more. What I didn't realize then was that this wasn't the end. It was barely the beginning of their campaign against me. The harassment started with phone calls, dozens per day, from both my parents' numbers and blocked numbers. I stopped answering any calls from unknown numbers, which complicated my work as a teacher, since parents of my students sometimes called from unfamiliar lines. The voicemails ranged from guilt-tripping, "How could you do this to your own parents?" to threatening, "You'll regret stealing what's rightfully ours." When I blocked their numbers, they started using different phones. The text messages were worse. Screenshots of luxury items with captions like, "What I could have bought with my inheritance," links to articles about ungrateful children, Bible verses about honoring thy father and mother twisted to suit their narrative. I tried to maintain my normal routine, but my focus at school suffered. My principal, Barbara, noticed my distraction and dark circles under my eyes. When I finally confided in her about the situation, she was supportive but concerned. "Cassandra, this sounds like harassment. Have you considered legal action?" Before I could answer, my classroom door burst open. My mother stood there, designer purse clutched like a weapon, my father looming behind her. "There she is," my mother announced loudly. "The thief herself." Barbara immediately stepped between us. "Excuse me, this is a private campus. You need to leave immediately." "Do you know what she's done?" My father's voice boomed through the empty classroom. "She's stolen millions from her own family." Barbara escorted my stunned fifth-grade students out while calling security. By the time the guards arrived, my parents had created a scene that would ripple through the entire school community. Parents waiting to pick up their children witnessed the commotion. By morning, rumors were spreading. That weekend, my phone exploded with notifications. My parents had contacted extended family members, cousins, aunts, uncles I barely knew, spreading their version of events. According to them, I had manipulated my elderly, mentally declining grandparents into changing their will, cheating my father out of his birthright. Most painful was the call from my cousin Rachel, who had been like a sister during our childhood. "Cassie, what's going on? Uncle Richard says you somehow got your grandparents to cut him out completely." "Rachel, that's not true. Grandma and Grandpa made their own decisions." "But 38 million, Cassie, and you won't share any with your own parents. It doesn't sound like you. You know my relationship with them. You know why I cut contact." Her voice cooled. "People change. They're family, Cassie. Maybe you should consider some kind of compromise." Later, I discovered my parents had promised Rachel a generous gift if she helped talk sense into me. The betrayal stung deeply. The next blow came from an unexpected direction. My boyfriend of 3 years, Ryan, had been supportive initially. He was a middle school science teacher I'd met at a district training kind, and seemingly uninterested in material things. But as the weeks passed, his attitude shifted. "I don't understand why you're being so stubborn," he said one night at dinner. "5 million is nothing to you now, but it would change their lives." "It's not about the money," I insisted. "It's about them thinking they're entitled to it after everything they've done or haven't done." "Maybe they're trying to make amends," he suggested. "People make mistakes. They're still your parents." Amends. They showed up with their hands out the minute they heard about the money. Not when Grandma was dying, not when Grandpa's heart was breaking, not once in 6 years. "All I'm saying is maybe giving them something would make this all go away. Don't you want peace?" I studied him carefully. "Did they contact you?" His hesitation told me everything. "They're worried about you, Cassie." The next day I discovered Ryan had met with my parents twice. He claimed he was trying to mediate, but his sudden interest in my financial decisions told a different story. When I confronted him, he finally admitted the truth. They said they just want what's fair. Maybe a third of the inheritance. They mentioned they'd be grateful to anyone who helped resolve this misunderstanding. They tried to bribe you to manipulate me. His silence was my answer. Get out, I whispered. We're done. As Ryan left my apartment for the last time, he turned back. You've changed, Cassie. The money's changed you. That night I returned from a long walk to find my car vandalized in the apartment parking lot. Someone had keyed "Give it back" into the driver's side door and slashed my tires. The police officer who responded seemed uninterested. Family disputes, he sighed, writing up the report. Always messy. Sure you don't just want to work this out privately. The next day, Thomas called. Cassandra, I think it's time we discussed increased security measures. And I'd recommend you consider taking a leave of absence from teaching until this blows over. This is my life, I protested. I can't just put everything on hold because they're throwing a tantrum. It's escalated beyond a tantrum, Thomas said gravely. Your father made some concerning statements to my secretary when he couldn't reach me. Something about accidents happening to greedy people. I don't think we should take that lightly. That afternoon I requested a leave of absence from school. Barbara understood immediately. I found a short-term rental across town using a different name. Thomas connected me with a private investigator, former police detective Frank Donovan. Your parents aren't just going to go away, Frank warned during our first meeting. People like this, when they think they're entitled to something, they escalate until they get it or until they hit a wall they can't break through. Our job is to build that wall. Little did I know how much higher the situation would escalate before I could find any peace. 2 weeks after I moved to the rental property, Thomas called with news that made my stomach drop. My parents had hired Wesley Hamilton, an aggressive estate attorney known for contesting wills. They're filing a formal challenge to your grandparents' will, Thomas explained. Hamilton has a reputation for scorched earth tactics. On what grounds, I asked. They're claiming your grandparents weren't mentally competent when they updated their will 3 years ago. They're also alleging undue influence, that you manipulated them into changing it to benefit you. The irony was painful. My grandparents had been sharp until their final days. Grandma had continued her volunteer bookkeeping at the community center until 2 months before her diagnosis. Grandpa had completed a stunning handcrafted grandfather clock just weeks before his heart began failing. That's absurd, I said. Anyone who knew them would testify to their mental clarity. They're counting on finding people who didn't know them well, but who will support their narrative. Wesley will look for any doctor who treated them, any banker who helped them, anyone who might remember a moment of confusion or forgetfulness, normal things in older adults that can be twisted to suggest incompetence. I met with Thomas at his office the following day, feeling like I was entering a fortress. The Hamilton and Reed law firm occupied 3 floors of a downtown high-rise with security that had been enhanced since my parents' threats. I've been expecting this challenge, Thomas admitted once we were seated in his office. Your grandparents expected it too. He pulled out a thick file. When they updated their will, George and Margaret took extraordinary measures to establish their competence and intentions. They underwent comprehensive cognitive assessments with 3 separate specialists. They documented every financial gift they'd given to your father over the years. They even recorded video testimony explaining their decision. He slid a USB drive across the desk. They wanted you to have this regardless, but given the circumstances, I think you should watch it now. Back at my temporary apartment, I plugged in the drive with trembling hands. My grandparents appeared on screen, seated in Thomas's office, looking much as they had before. Illness took its toll. Hello, Cassie. My grandfather began, his familiar smile warming his weathered face. If you're watching this, it means we're gone, and you've learned about your inheritance. We want you to understand why we made this decision. My grandmother continued. Richard has received substantial financial support from us throughout his adult life. We've kept careful records which Thomas has. In total, we've given him approximately $3.2 million over the years. I gasped at the figure. None of it was ever repaid, my grandfather added. Despite promises, we don't regret helping our son, but we've come to understand that money has never brought him happiness or stability. You, on the other hand, my grandmother said, have built a meaningful life without financial support. You've chosen work that matters. You visit us without wanting anything. You are the kind of person we always hoped our wealth would help create. My grandfather leaned forward. We're not disinheriting Richard to punish him, but we've concluded that more money would only harm him further. And you, Cassie, we believe will use this inheritance wisely, in ways that would make us proud. Tears streamed down my face as they detailed their reasoning, their love for me evident in every word. They knew exactly what they were doing. They had planned meticulously to protect their decision, and to protect me from exactly what was happening now. The next day, I received the formal legal notice of the will contest. Reading through the allegations felt like being punched repeatedly. According to the filing, I had systematically isolated the decedents from their son, manipulated them during periods of cognitive decline, and exerted undue influence to secure financial gain. Thomas recommended we countersue for defamation, but I hesitated. I don't want to escalate this any further, I explained. I just want them to stop. Cassandra. Thomas said gently, they won't stop. People who believe they're entitled to something rarely back down until forced to. We need to establish early that pursuing this will be costly and embarrassing for them. Reluctantly, I agreed. Thomas filed our response, including a counterclaim for defamation and harassment. He also filed for a temporary restraining order based on the escalating threats and vandalism. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly the story would become public. A paralegal at Hamilton's firm apparently leaked details to a reporter at the local newspaper. The next morning there it was on page 3, Family Feud, local teacher inherits millions, parents claim elder abuse. My private pain had become public spectacle, and my parents were just getting started. The newspaper article was just the beginning. Within days, my mother had given a tearful interview to a local TV station, portraying herself and my father as heartbroken parents whose elderly, confused parents had been turned against them by their manipulative daughter. We just want what George and Margaret would have wanted if they had been thinking clearly, she sobbed on camera. For family to be taken care of equally. Cassandra has refused to even discuss sharing the inheritance with us. The reporter made a token attempt at balance. We reached out to Cassandra Mitchell for comment, but she didn't respond. Of course I hadn't responded. I didn't even know about the interview until it aired. The story spread quickly. Local news loved the drama of the wealthy family dispute. Comments sections filled with opinions from strangers who knew nothing about my relationship with my grandparents or parents. The narrative largely favored my parents. After all, the idea of a child refusing to share an inheritance with her own parents seemed callous to those who didn't know our history. My mother, always social media savvy, created a Facebook page called Justice for the Mitchell Family that quickly gathered hundreds of followers. She shared carefully curated photos from my childhood, making it appear we had been a loving, close-knit family. Old acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years started messaging me, alternating between concern and judgment. Is everything okay? This doesn't sound like you. I can't believe you do this to your own parents. Everyone's talking about this. You should try to settle before your reputation is ruined. I deactivated my social media accounts, but the damage was spreading. Parents of my students began requesting their children be moved to different classes. The principal called to express concern about the distraction. My leave of absence became indefinite. Then came the deepest betrayal yet. Ryan, my ex-boyfriend, reached out asking to meet. Despite my better judgment, I agreed to coffee at a quiet cafe. I miss you, he said, looking appropriately contrite. I've been thinking about everything and I handled it all wrong. I'm sorry. For a brief moment, hope flickered. Perhaps one relationship could be salvaged from this wreckage. I appreciate that, I said cautiously. It's been a nightmare. I could use a friend right now. His expression shifted, becoming more intense. I want to be more than a friend, Cassie. I think we can work through this. I understand now that you need time to process everything with the inheritance. Something in his phrasing felt off. Process everything with the inheritance. Yeah, decide what you want to do with it. With the money. He reached for my hand. I've been thinking we could use some of it to start fresh somewhere new. Maybe buy that mountain cabin we always talked about. I withdrew my hand. You've been meeting with them again, haven't you? His hesitation told me everything. How much did they offer you this time? I asked, my voice barely audible. Ryan flushed. It's not like that. They just think I could help you see reason. They're offering a fair split, half for you, half for them. Everyone walks away happy. And what do you get, Ryan? A finder's fee. A percentage. He couldn't meet my eyes. They mentioned helping us get started. A gift for bringing the family back together. Get out, I whispered. And tell my parents their latest scheme failed. Back at my apartment, I collapsed on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. The man I had loved for 3 years had been willing to manipulate me for a payoff. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. Later that evening, I discovered someone had spray-painted "Gold Digger" on my apartment door. The building manager, apologetic but firm, suggested I find alternative housing when my short-term lease ended the following week. We can't have this kind of drama affecting other residents. Emotionally exhausted, I called the only friend who had steadfastly supported me through everything, Melissa, a fellow teacher I'd known since college. You can't keep running, she said after I explained my latest housing crisis. You need to stay at my place for now. And Cassie, you need to stop being passive about this. They're destroying your life because they know you won't fight back hard enough. What am I supposed to do? I asked desperately. Fight fire with fire, she replied firmly. They're using the public against you. Use the truth against them. They're spreading lies. Spread facts. They've shown who they really are. Believe them and act accordingly. That night, through tears and determination, I realized Melissa was right. I had been trying to take the high road, to not escalate, to wait for my parents to come to their senses. But they had declared all-out war, and my restraint had only emboldened them. The next morning, I called Thomas and requested an urgent meeting with him. And Frank Donovan, the private investigator. I'm done playing defense, I told them. It's time to show my parents that I won't be bullied, manipulated, or shamed into giving them what they want. Whatever it takes, whatever it costs, I want this to end. Thomas nodded solemnly. I was hoping you'd reach this point. We've been gathering evidence, building a case. It's time to use it. Frank opened his laptop. Your parents have a lot of skeletons in their closet, Miss Mitchell. And I've found most of them. As they outlined their strategy, I felt a strange mix of sadness and resolve. I had never wanted to destroy my parents. I had only wanted to be left in peace with the inheritance my grandparents had chosen to give me. But my parents had forced this confrontation, and now they would face the consequences of their actions. It was time to take control of my story and my life. I believed the situation couldn't get worse until it did. 3 days after moving in with Melissa, I received a call from Thomas. Cassandra, the police are looking for you. Your parents have filed a report claiming you stole jewelry worth approximately $85,000 from their home. My blood ran cold. That's impossible. I haven't been to their house in 6 years. They're claiming you visited last month while they were on vacation and used your old key to enter the property. They've provided a detailed list of missing items, primarily family heirlooms. This is insane, I whispered. It's completely fabricated. I know, Thomas assured me, but you need to address this properly. I've arranged for you to meet with Detective Wilson tomorrow morning. Don't worry, I'll be with you. The police station felt oppressive as Thomas and I were led to an interview room. Detective Wilson, a stern-faced woman in her 50s, seemed skeptical from the outset. Miss Mitchell, your parents have provided considerable documentation regarding their missing property, including appraisals and photographs. They claim you've harbored resentment over these family heirlooms, particularly your grandmother's diamond necklace, which was given to your mother rather than you. My grandmother's necklace had indeed gone to my mother years ago with my full support. I had received her wedding ring instead, which I wore every day since her passing. Detective, I haven't been to my parents' home since 2019, I stated firmly. I don't have a key, and I certainly didn't steal anything. Can you account for your whereabouts on April 12 to 14? She asked. Fortunately, I could. I had been on a school field trip to Washington, D.C., accompanied by 30 students and 5 other teachers. Thomas provided documentation of the trip while I explained. This accusation is part of an ongoing harassment campaign related to an inheritance dispute. My parents are attempting to pressure me into giving them money they weren't left in my grandparents' will. Detective Wilson's expression softened slightly. We're aware of the public nature of your family situation. However, we have to investigate all claims thoroughly. After 2 grueling hours, Thomas and I left the station. No charges were filed, but the experience left me shaken. That was their most dangerous move yet, Thomas said gravely. False police reports are criminal offenses. They're getting desperate. Back at Melissa's apartment, Frank Donovan was waiting with his latest findings. I've been digging into your parents' finances, he began without preamble. It explains a lot about their desperation. Frank revealed that despite their high-powered careers and apparent wealth, my parents were deeply in debt. They had remortgaged their home 3 times. Credit card debt exceeded $300,000. There were luxury car leases, country club memberships, and vacation properties they couldn't afford. Most disturbing was evidence that my father had a serious gambling problem. Bank records showed regular large withdrawals at casinos. He owed significant sums to people who operated outside the law. These aren't the kind of creditors who accept bankruptcy as an answer, Frank explained. Your parents need that inheritance not just to maintain their lifestyle but possibly to stay safe. This revelation hit me hard. For all their flaws, they were still the people who had brought me into this world. The idea of them in physical danger troubled me deeply. Should I just give them some money to make this stop? I asked, my resolve wavering. Melissa, who had been quietly listening, spoke up forcefully. Absolutely not. They've harassed you, defamed you, tried to get you arrested, and turned people against you. Giving in now would only validate their tactics. She's right, Thomas added. Your grandparents specifically chose not to leave your father money because they knew it would feed his destructive habits. Honoring their wishes means not enabling those same behaviors. Frank pulled out more documents. There's something else you should know. Your parents have been promising percentages of the expected inheritance to multiple people. Ryan wasn't the only one they tried to bribe. They've got at least 8 people expecting payouts if they succeed. My emotional breakdown came that night after everyone had left. I collapsed on Melissa's sofa, finally facing the painful truth. My parents didn't just want money, they were willing to destroy me to get it. The last fragile hope of reconciliation shattered completely. When Melissa found me the next morning still on the sofa, eyes swollen from crying, something had changed within me. I'm done being passive, I told her. I'm done hiding and hoping this will blow over. We called Thomas and Frank for an emergency strategy session. Over coffee and legal pads, we developed a 3-pronged approach. First, document everything, every threat, every lie, every harassment. Create an undeniable record of my parents' campaign against me. Second, legally counter every move they made with twice the force. Restraining orders, defamation suits, criminal charges for the false police report, all options were now on the table. Third, and most importantly, reclaim the narrative. My parents had been shaping public perception for months. It was time for the truth to come out. I need to talk to Rachel, I said suddenly. My cousin. She might listen if I show her evidence of what's really happening. Frank was skeptical, but agreed to arrange a secure meeting. 2 days later, Rachel and I met at a coffee shop outside town. I came armed with documentation, bank records showing my grandparents' loans to my father, the video testimony explaining their decision, evidence of my parents' bribes to Ryan and others. Rachel was stunned. They told me you manipulated your grandparents, that you refused to even discuss sharing. They promised to help with my student loans if I helped convince you. They've been lying to everyone, Rachel. This isn't about family or fairness. It's about their debts and their belief that they're entitled to money they didn't earn. Rachel's eyes welled with tears. I'm so sorry, Cassie. I should have known better. As we parted, she grabbed my hand. They're planning something else. I overheard them talking about documents, something about making their own version of your grandparents' intentions. I think they might be planning to forge something. This information proved crucial. Thomas immediately filed for an emergency injunction prohibiting my parents from introducing any new discovered documents related to my grandparents' wishes. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place when Frank traced the anonymous threats I'd been receiving. They weren't directly from my parents at all. They came from a man named Victor Russo who ran an illegal gambling operation my father frequented. My father had apparently promised to pay his debts using his imminent inheritance. Armed with this information, we developed a strategic leak to counter my parents' public narrative. Thomas connected me with Catherine Wells, a respected journalist known for her integrity. I provided her with carefully selected evidence, nothing that would violate legal boundaries, but enough to show the truth behind the headlines. The resulting article, Inheritance Battle: The Untold Story, presented a balanced account that questioned my parents' motives and methods for the first time. Public sentiment began to shift. My parents' response was immediate and furious, exactly as we had anticipated. In their anger, they made critical mistakes that would ultimately lead to their undoing in court. Frank Donovan's investigation into my parents' finances yielded far more than we had anticipated. Beyond gambling debts and extravagant spending, he uncovered a pattern of financial misconduct stretching back decades. Your father was quietly asked to leave his previous law firm, Frank explained as we reviewed his findings. They discovered he had been embezzling from client accounts. The firm kept it quiet to avoid scandal, allowing him to resign instead of facing charges. Documents showed that my father had diverted approximately $475,000 from trust accounts over 3 years, carefully concealing the theft through creative accounting. His former firm had forced him to repay the money and sign a non-disclosure agreement. Even more disturbing was evidence of my mother's insurance fraud. She had filed multiple suspicious claims over the years: jewelry mysteriously lost during vacations, art allegedly damaged by contractors, even a small house fire with convenient timing. Each claim was just below the threshold that would trigger intensive investigation. They've been living beyond their means for their entire marriage, Frank concluded. And when legitimate income wasn't enough, they found other ways. Thomas looked grim as he reviewed the documents. This explains their desperation for the inheritance. It's not just about maintaining their lifestyle, it's about continuing patterns of financial manipulation they've relied on for years. The private investigator had also confirmed my cousin Rachel's warning. My parents had indeed approached a document specialist, known for questionable ethics, attempting to create a lost letter from my grandfather, expressing his true wishes to divide the estate equally. Fortunately, the specialist had declined, fearing potential forgery charges. Most alarming was Frank's discovery about my parents' gambling debts. My father owed over $700,000 to Victor Russo, a figure that explained the escalating threats. Russo's reputation for violent debt collection was well known in certain circles. Your parents have been promising percentages of their expected inheritance to multiple parties, Frank explained. Not just Ryan and Rachel, but at least 6 other individuals who've been recruited to pressure you in various ways. I was stunned by the web of manipulation. How could they promise money they don't have to so many people? Because they never intended to pay everyone, Thomas said quietly. They just needed enough pressure on you from enough directions to force you to give in. Once they had the money, they'd pay Russo first, then figure out how to shortchange everyone else. Armed with this information, I reached out to Rachel again, this time inviting her to meet with Thomas and me at his office. She arrived looking nervous but determined. "I want to help," she said simply. "What they're doing is wrong, and I'm ashamed I fell for it." Thomas explained our strategy. "We need evidence of their attempts to manipulate family members against Cassandra. Your testimony would be extremely valuable, but I understand if you're reluctant." Rachel squared her shoulders. "I'm not just willing to testify. I can do better than that." She pulled out her phone. "I recorded a conversation with Uncle Richard last week. He didn't know I was recording. He explicitly talks about fabricating evidence and bribing people to pressure Cassie." The recording was damning. My father clearly stated his intention to create whatever documents necessary to get what should have been mine. He offered Rachel a finder's fee of $100,000 for helping convince me to do the right thing. He even mentioned the false police report, laughing about how it had been just one more way to tighten the screws. Thomas looked like he'd been handed a winning lottery ticket. "This is exactly what we needed. With your permission, we'll have this recording transcribed and authenticated." Rachel agreed immediately. "There's more," she added. "Aunt Diana showed me a list of family members and friends they've approached. She called it their pressure campaign. I took a photo when she wasn't looking." She forwarded the image to Thomas. With Rachel's evidence and Frank's investigation results, we now had irrefutable proof of my parents' orchestrated campaign. Thomas immediately filed an amended countersuit, adding charges of conspiracy, fraud, and malicious prosecution. The unexpected breakthrough came from an anonymous email Frank received 3 days later. A former associate of Victor Russo, seeking immunity on unrelated charges, provided information about my father's gambling debts and Russo's threats, including evidence that the car vandalism had been carried out by one of Russo's collectors. The pieces were falling into place, but the most shocking revelation came when Thomas received a call from my parents' attorney, Wesley Hamilton. "He wants to meet without our clients present," Thomas reported. "He says it's urgent." Hamilton arrived at Thomas's office looking haggard and uncomfortable. After minimal pleasantries, he got straight to the point. "I'm withdrawing from representing Richard and Diana Mitchell," he announced. "I filed the necessary papers this morning." "May I ask why?" Thomas inquired, though his slight smile suggested he already knew. Hamilton's expression was pained. "They misrepresented certain key facts when retaining my services. I've recently become aware of actions they've taken that I cannot, as an officer of the court, be associated with." After Hamilton left, Thomas turned to me with the first genuine smile I'd seen in months. "He knows they lied to him. He knows about the false police report and the attempted document forgery. An attorney withdrawing mid-case like this sends a powerful message to the court." That evening, I received my first communication from my parents in weeks, a terse email from my father. "We need to talk. Privately. No lawyers." I forwarded it to Thomas without responding. "They're feeling the walls close in," he observed. "Their attorney has abandoned them, their fabrications are being exposed, and they're running out of options. Be prepared for either a desperate final attack or a sudden offer to settle." What we couldn't have anticipated was that my parents would try both simultaneously. The attack came in the form of an anonymous package delivered to my school principal containing fabricated evidence suggesting I had misappropriated school funds. Fortunately, Barbara recognized the deception immediately and contacted me before taking any action. The settlement offer arrived via email the next day. 50/50 split, mutual non-disparagement, all actions dropped. No apology, no acknowledgement of their campaign against me, just a business proposal. Thomas advised rejecting it outright. "We're in a position of strength now. They're offering terms because they know they're going to lose everything in court." The court date for the will contest was set for the following month. As we prepared, more evidence continued to surface. Former friends of my parents came forward with stories of being asked to pressure me. 2 fellow teachers reported being approached about providing damaging information about my work performance. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. Despite our strong position, I felt no joy or vindication, only sadness that it had come to this. These people who should have loved me, who should have been proud of the person their parents had helped raise, had instead tried to destroy me for money. Melissa found me on her balcony at dawn, watching the sunrise. "Whatever happens today," she said, handing me coffee, "remember that your grandparents knew exactly what they were doing when they chose you as their heir. They saw your character. They believed in you. Don't let anything that happens in that courtroom make you doubt their decision or yourself." Her words gave me the strength I needed to face what was coming. I wasn't just defending my inheritance anymore. I was honoring the faith my grandparents had placed in me. The courtroom was more crowded than I expected. Besides the usual legal personnel, several reporters sat in the back row. I recognized friends of my grandparents, a few of my colleagues, and even some extended family members I hadn't seen in years. My parents sat at the plaintiff's table with their new attorney, a nervous-looking young man who kept shuffling his papers. Thomas and I took our seats as Judge Eleanor Harmon entered. In her 60s, with silver hair and penetrating eyes, she had a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency. "We're here on the matter of Mitchell versus Mitchell," she began. "Let me be clear from the outset, I've reviewed the filings from both sides, including the recent amendments and evidence submissions. I find many of the allegations deeply troubling." Her gaze fixed on my parents. "This court takes accusations of mental incompetence and undue influence very seriously. Equally seriously, we take evidence of false claims and legal harassment. Proceed accordingly." My parents' new attorney, James Morris, presented their case first. Despite his initial nervousness, he articulated their claims competently. My grandparents had been in declining mental health. They had always intended an equal division of assets between their son and granddaughter. I had isolated them from family and manipulated them during their vulnerable final years. To support these claims, Morris called several witnesses, my parents' neighbors who had observed my grandparents occasionally seeming confused during visits, a former housekeeper who testified that I spent unusual amounts of time alone with my grandparents, a distant cousin who claimed my grandfather once mistook him for someone else at a family gathering. The testimony felt flimsy and circumstantial. Thomas made short work of each witness on cross-examination, establishing that none had spent significant time with my grandparents in their final years. None had any medical expertise to assess cognitive function, and none could provide specific examples of manipulation on my part. When my mother took the stand, she played her role perfectly, the grieving, bewildered daughter who only wanted what her parents would have wanted. "My father always told me that family comes first," she testified tearfully. "He would never have intentionally left his only son without inheritance unless someone had influenced him against us." Thomas's cross-examination was methodical and devastating. "Mrs. Mitchell, when was the last time you visited your parents before their passing?" She hesitated. "I'm not sure of the exact date. Would it surprise you to learn that according to your parents' visitor logs and security system, you visited exactly twice in the 3 years before their deaths? Once when your father was hospitalized and once 9 months later for approximately 20 minutes. The color drained from my mother's face. "We were very busy with our careers. Too busy to visit your elderly, eventually terminal parents, but not too busy to contest their will for financial gain," Thomas observed. "Let's discuss your financial situation." Despite Morris's objections, Judge Harmon allowed the questioning. Thomas methodically walked through my parents' financial mismanagement, unpaid debts, and gambling problems. With each revelation, my mother's composed facade crumbled further. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Mitchell, that you and your husband have promised portions of this expected inheritance to multiple individuals despite having no legal claim to it?" "That's not we just," she stammered. Isn't it true that these promises were made specifically to recruit people to pressure your daughter into relinquishing her rightful inheritance? We were just trying to bring family together to resolve this dispute, she insisted weakly. Thomas presented the authenticated recording from Rachel. My mother's face went ashen as her own voice played through the courtroom explicitly discussing their pressure campaign. My father's testimony began with confident assertions about his parents' mental decline and my alleged manipulation, but under Thomas's questioning his composure quickly deteriorated. Mr. Mitchell, your parents lent you approximately $3.2 million over the course of your adult life. How much of that did you repay? My father shifted uncomfortably. Those were gifts, not loans. Thomas presented bank records and signed loan agreements. These documents signed by you indicate otherwise. Again, how much did you repay? Some of those investments didn't perform as expected, my father evaded. So the answer is nothing. You repaid nothing. Thomas paused. Now let's discuss your plans for your parents' historic home if you had received it as part of the inheritance. This question visibly startled my father. What do you mean? Thomas produced emails between my father and a commercial real estate developer. According to these communications dated 3 months before your father's death, you were already negotiating to sell your parents' home of 50 years to make way for luxury condominiums. You stated, and I quote, "Once the property is mine, we can move quickly on demolition." A murmur ran through the courtroom. My grandparents' home had been a landmark in our community, lovingly maintained for generations. Many of their friends in attendance looked visibly distressed at this revelation. My father's face reddened. That was just preliminary discussion. Nothing was decided. Yet you were planning to sell your parents' beloved home before they had even passed away, Thomas pressed. Did they know about these plans? It wasn't relevant at the time, my father muttered. Wasn't relevant? Or did you deliberately conceal these plans because you knew they would have been horrified and might have changed their will to specifically prevent this from happening? My father's control finally snapped. It was my inheritance to do with as I pleased. Those old fools had no business giving everything to her. She's just a teacher, for God's sake. What does she know about managing wealth? I deserved that money. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Harmon's expression hardened. Mr. Mitchell, control yourself, or I will have you removed. As my father struggled to compose himself, his attorney appeared increasingly uncomfortable. During a brief recess, I observed them in intense whispered conversation. When court resumed, Morris addressed the judge. Your Honor, in light of recent developments, I must regretfully withdraw as counsel for the plaintiffs effective immediately. I can no longer represent them in good faith. My parents looked stunned as their second attorney abandoned them mid-hearing. The judge sighed. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, do you wish to continue pro se or request a continuance to find new counsel? My father's face flushed with anger stood. We'll continue. We don't need another lawyer to tell the truth. What followed was a disastrous attempt by my father to salvage their case. Without legal guidance, he became increasingly hostile and erratic, interrupting witnesses and making unfounded accusations. When it was our turn to present evidence, Thomas was methodical and prepared. He presented the video testimony of my grandparents' medical reports confirming their mental competence and documentation of my parents' campaign of harassment. Our witnesses included my grandparents' longtime physician, their friends who had seen them regularly until their final days, and even my principal Barbara, who testified about my parents' disruptive behavior at school. Most powerful was Rachel's testimony about being recruited into my parents' pressure campaign with promises of money. Several other family members and acquaintances came forward with similar accounts. The final devastating evidence came from an unexpected source. Frank had located Victor Russo, who, facing his own legal troubles, had agreed to testify about my father's gambling debts and the threats made to force payment. He confirmed ordering the vandalism of my car and other intimidation tactics. By the time Thomas finished our presentation, my parents sat alone at their table, looking defeated. Judge Harmon called a brief recess before delivering her ruling. In the hallway, Thomas squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. "It's over, Cassandra. They have nothing left." When court resumed, Judge Harmon didn't mince words. "This court finds absolutely no evidence of mental incompetence or undue influence in the creation of George and Margaret Mitchell's will. To the contrary, the evidence shows they took extraordinary measures to document their mental capacity and clear intentions." She turned her stern gaze to my parents. "What this court does find disturbing is the coordinated campaign of harassment, intimidation, and defamation perpetrated by the plaintiffs against their own daughter in an attempt to coerce her into relinquishing her legal inheritance. The petition contesting the will is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, this court grants the defendants counterclaims for defamation, harassment, and malicious prosecution. Damages will be determined in a separate hearing." She leaned forward. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, I strongly advise you to seek legal counsel before that hearing. I am also referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges regarding the false police report and witness tampering." With a final bang of her gavel, it was over. My parents stormed out without looking at me, their faces masks of fury and humiliation. As people filed out of the courtroom, many stopped to offer congratulations or words of support. My grandparents' friends embraced me, telling me how proud George and Margaret would have been of my strength. Outside on the courthouse steps, Thomas smiled at me. "Your grandparents chose well, Cassandra. Now the healing can begin." In the aftermath of the court ruling, my life slowly began to rebuild from the rubble. The most immediate change was freedom from fear. With the restraining order now permanent and criminal charges pending against my parents for the false police report, their harassment campaign abruptly ceased. The legal consequences for my parents were significant. Beyond the dismissal of their will contest, they faced substantial financial penalties from my successful counterclaims. The district attorney pursued charges for filing the false police report, resulting in probation and community service. The State Bar Association opened an ethics investigation into my father's professional conduct. I took no pleasure in their downfall. Despite everything, they were still the people who had brought me into this world. When Thomas asked if I wanted to push for maximum damages, I declined. "They're already facing consequences," I explained. "More punishment won't heal anything." Instead, I requested they receive mandatory counseling for gambling addiction and financial management as part of any settlement. The court agreed. My parents left town shortly after the ruling, relocating to Arizona without saying goodbye. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard they had divorced within months. My father eventually sought treatment for his gambling addiction, while my mother remarried quickly to a wealthy retiree. I returned to teaching that fall, grateful that the media attention had faded. Barbara welcomed me back warmly, and while a few parents remained uncomfortable, most of the community had followed the court case and understood the truth of what had happened. "The kids missed you terribly," Barbara told me my first day back. "Especially your read-aloud voices. The substitute apparently wasn't nearly as good at doing character voices." In honor of my grandparents, I established the George and Margaret Mitchell Educational Foundation, providing scholarships for students pursuing teaching careers and grants for innovative classroom programs. The foundation allowed me to expand my grandparents' legacy of caring while continuing my own career in the classroom. "I don't want to be defined by wealth," I explained to Thomas when setting up the foundation. "I want to be defined by what I do with it." My relationship with extended family slowly mended. Rachel and I rebuilt our friendship, though the shadow of betrayal took time to fade completely. Other relatives, seeing the court evidence and understanding my parents' manipulations, gradually reconnected. The hardest healing came from within. I struggled with trust issues after Ryan's betrayal. Dating seemed impossible when I couldn't help wondering if new romantic interests were attracted to me or my bank account. On Thomas's recommendation, I began therapy with Dr. Lauren Phillips, who specialized in trauma and family estrangement. Our weekly sessions became a lifeline as I processed the events of the past year. "What troubles you most about all that happened?" Dr. Phillips asked during one particularly difficult session. "That I'll never have parents who truly love me," I admitted, tears streaming down my face. "That I'll always have this hole where family should be. The people who should have loved and protected you failed profoundly," she acknowledged. "But family isn't just biology. It's connection, support, showing up for each other." "By that definition, who is your family?" I thought of Melissa, who had opened her home to me during my darkest days. Thomas, who had fought for me like a father would. Barbara, who had protected my career and reputation. My students who welcomed me back with handmade cards and unbridled enthusiasm. "I guess I have more family than I realized," I said quietly. "Exactly," Dr. Phillips smiled. "And that's something worth celebrating." A year after the court ruling, I bought a house, not a mansion, but a comfortable 4-bedroom craftsman with a large yard and plenty of natural light. It was walking distance from my school and had a dedicated room for creating teaching materials. Most importantly, it felt like home. On the anniversary of my grandfather's passing, I finally opened the letter they had left me, which Thomas had given me the day I learned of my inheritance. I had kept it sealed all this time, somehow not ready to hear their final words until now. Sitting in my new garden, surrounded by plants reminiscent of my grandmother's beloved garden, I carefully broke the seal. "Dearest Cassandra. If you're reading this, we've left this world, but we hope our love remains with you always. You have been the greatest joy of our lives, not because of any achievement or milestone, but simply because of who you are. Kind, thoughtful, determined to make a positive difference in this world. We've made you the beneficiary of our estate, not to burden you with wealth, but to give you freedom. Freedom to pursue what matters, to help others, to live authentically without financial worry constraining your choices. We know this decision may create difficulty with your parents. We've tried throughout our lives to help Richard find contentment and purpose beyond material success without success. We fear that additional wealth would only feed the patterns that have brought him and Diana unhappiness, despite their outward trappings of success. Trust yourself, Cassie. You have always had a wisdom beyond your years, an internal compass that guides you toward what is right, rather than what is expedient. That quality is infinitely more valuable than any inheritance. Remember us not through possessions or money, but by living fully, loving openly, and finding joy in simple moments as we tried to teach you. Build a life rich with meaning. Surround yourself with people who see your true worth, and know that wherever we are immensely proud of you. With all our love. Grandma and Grandpa. Tears streamed down my face as I finished reading, not tears of sadness but of profound gratitude. They had known exactly what might happen and had prepared me as best they could. More importantly, they had seen me, truly seen me, and loved me for exactly who I was. I realized then that the inheritance wasn't really about money at all. The true inheritance was the values they had instilled in me: integrity, compassion, resilience, and the courage to stand up for what's right even when it's difficult. That was a legacy worth protecting. Have you ever had to stand your ground against family pressure? What would you have done in my situation? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. Share with someone who might need to be reminded that sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, your worth isn't determined by others' treatment of you, but by the strength you find within yourself.